For nearly a decade, Mark believed his marriage was built on quiet strength. There were no dramatic fights, no slammed doors, just a steady routine of shared mornings, inside jokes, and plans that stretched comfortably into the future. He and his wife, Elena, had grown together from their 20s into adulthood, learning each other's rhythms the way people learn the layout of a familiar room. From the outside, their relationship looked stable, even enviable, but stability can sometimes hide silence. Over the past few months, Mark sensed a subtle shift he couldn't quite name. Elena had become distant in small, almost invisible ways. Her laughter came slower, her phone never left her side, and conversations that once flowed easily now ended quickly. She was often tired, often distracted, and somehow always elsewhere, even when sitting right next to him. At first, Mark brushed it off as stress, work, life, the way of adulthood. He told himself that all marriages go through quiet phases. Still, an unease settled in his chest, a feeling that something important was slipping out of reach, even though he couldn't yet see what it was. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, through details Mark tried hard to ignore. Elena began working late more often, yet her explanations were vague, inconsistent. When he asked simple questions, "Who were you with? How was your day?" her answers felt rehearsed, stripped of the warmth they once carried. She guarded her phone like it held something fragile, turned the screen away whenever he entered the room. One evening, while looking for a charger in her car, Mark noticed a name flash across the dashboard screen as a message came through. It wasn't a co-worker or friend he recognized. The message was short, intimate in tone, ending with a heart emoji. His stomach tightened, but he told himself not to jump to conclusions. Coincidences happen. Doubt, he reasoned, is dangerous. The moment that shattered denial came days later. Elena had left her laptop open on the kitchen table before rushing out. A notification appeared, an email preview, then a chat window. Mark hadn't meant to read it, but once his eyes caught the words, he couldn't look away. Inside, jokes that weren't his. Plans that didn't include him. Affection written plainly, without fear. His hands trembled as understanding settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress. It was betrayal, quiet, deliberate, and real. Mark didn't confront her right away. He needed time to breathe, to make sense of the weight now pressing on his chest. But when Elena came home that evening, humming softly as if nothing had changed, the calm broke. He asked her to sit down, his voice steadier than he felt. At first, she looked confused, even annoyed. Then he mentioned the messages. The color drained from her face. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. When she finally spoke, her words came quickly, tumbling over each other, excuses layered on top of explanations. She said it just happened, that it didn't mean anything, that she felt lonely and misunderstood. She insisted it was never meant to hurt him. Mark listened, numb. Each sentence felt like another crack, spreading through something he had trusted completely. When he asked how long it had been going on, she hesitated. That pause told him more than any answer could. Tears followed, hers first, then his, but they fell for different reasons. In that moment, the marriage he thought he knew no longer existed. What stood in its place was uncertainty, broken trust, and a truth neither of them could take back. The days that followed blurred together, marked by sleepless nights and long, empty hours. Mark moved through his routine like a shadow of himself, replaying every moment of the past few months, searching for the exact point where things had gone wrong. Shock came first, a dull disbelief that made everything feel unreal, as if this were someone else's life unfolding around him. Anger followed quickly and without warning. It surged in waves, sharp and consuming. He felt furious at Elena for betrayal, at the man who had stepped into his place, and at himself for not seeing the signs sooner. Every memory they shared now felt tainted, rewritten by doubt. Even small reminders, a song, a place they once loved, cut deeper than he expected. But anger couldn't last forever. Eventually, it gave way to sadness, heavier and quieter. Mark mourned the future he thought was certain, the version of his marriage that existed only in his mind now. Acceptance didn't come easily, and it didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, in moments of clarity between the pain. when he realized that no amount of rage could change what had already happened. When the emotional storm finally began to settle, Mark knew he couldn't stay suspended in pain forever. Avoiding the decision was its own kind of suffering. One quiet morning, after another night spent staring at the ceiling, he understood that whatever came next had to be a choice he made consciously, not out of fear, anger, or habit. He asked Elena for honesty, not apologies. This time, there were no rush excuses. She admitted the affair had lasted longer than she'd first implied, and confessed that it filled an emotional gap she hadn't known how to name. She said she was confused, torn between guilt and relief, unsure of what she truly wanted. Hearing this hurt more than the lies, but it was also the first moment that felt real. Mark realized then that saving the marriage wouldn't mean returning to what they had. It would mean building something entirely new, if that was even possible. And before that, he needed to decide whether staying was an act of strength or simply fear of letting go. Mark took space, not to punish Elena, but to hear his own thoughts without interruption. He stayed with a friend for a few days, distancing himself from a house that now felt heavy with unanswered questions. In that quiet, away from explanations and tears, he began to see his situation more clearly. Love, he realized, wasn't enough on its own. Trust was a foundation, and right now it was fractured. He thought about what rebuilding would truly require: transparency, patience, and a willingness to live with doubt for a long time. He asked himself hard questions. Could he forgive without resenting? Could he listen without imagining betrayal behind every word? The answers didn't come easily, but they came honestly. When he returned home, Mark spoke calmly without accusation. He told Elena that he needed time, not promises, to see whether trust could exist again. For the first time since the discovery, the decision felt like it belonged to him. Whatever the outcome, he knew he would no longer drift through the pain. He would move forward with intention. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable in ways Mark hadn't anticipated. The house was quieter, filled with polite conversations and careful pauses. Elena tried to be open, offering passwords, explaining where she was going, checking in more than ever before. But each gesture, meant to rebuild trust, also reminded Mark of why it was broken. He noticed how his own behavior had changed. He was more guarded now, less spontaneous. A late notification still made his chest tighten, even when there was nothing to fear. Some days, he felt hopeful, imagining that honesty and effort might slowly stitch things back together. Other days, the weight of what had happened felt unbearable, and he questioned whether staying was only prolonging the pain. Still, Mark didn't rush himself. He began to understand that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a cycle of progress and setbacks, clarity, and confusion. And while the future remained uncertain, one thing became clear. He was no longer the same man he had been before betrayal. And perhaps in time, that change would guide him toward the right ending. As time passed, Mark began to see the affair less as a single act of betrayal and more as a symptom of deeper fractures in their relationship. This didn't excuse what Elena had done, but it helped him understand it. He reflected on how often they had chosen comfort over honesty, silence over difficult conversations. They had been together, yet emotionally drifting in parallel rather than side by side. He started journaling, putting thoughts onto paper that felt too heavy to carry alone. Writing gave shape to his confusion. He acknowledged his own shortcomings, not as blame, but as truth. He had assumed stability meant everything was fine. He had stopped asking how Elena felt, not just how her day went. This realization hurt, but it also gave him back a sense of agency. For the first time since the discovery, Mark felt something close to control. He couldn't change the past, but he could decide what kind of partner and what kind of man he wanted to be moving forward, regardless of whether the marriage survived. The turning point didn't come in an argument or a dramatic confession. It arrived quietly on an ordinary evening. Mark and Elena were sitting across from each other, discussing counseling options, when he noticed how exhausted he felt. Not just physically, but emotionally. The constant effort to measure every word, to manage every feeling, had begun to drain him. He realized that while Elena was trying to repair what she had broken, he was still living in reaction mode. His days revolved around betrayal, shaping his mood, his thoughts, even his sense of self. That wasn't the life he wanted, whether married or not. He needed peace, not just answers. That night, Mark admitted something he'd been avoiding. Love alone wasn't guiding his choice anymore. Self-respect was. And for the first time, he allowed himself to consider that walking away might not be a failure, but an act of honesty toward himself. Mark made the decision slowly, carefully, as if handling something fragile. He told Elena that he couldn't continue living in uncertainty, always questioning what was real. He explained that while he believed she felt remorse, the trust between them had changed in a way he didn't know how to repair. Elena cried, not in protest, but in understanding. She didn't argue or try to persuade him to stay. That, more than anything, confirmed his choice. They spoke openly that night about their shared history, the good years, and the mistakes neither of them could undo. There was grief, but also a strange sense of relief. They agreed to separate with respect, to let go without turning their past into something bitter. As painful as it was, Mark felt a quiet certainty settle in. This ending, though not the one he had imagined, was honest, and that mattered more than comfort. The process of separating was harder than Mark expected. It wasn't the logistics that hurt the most. It was the small, intimate details. Dividing books they once read together. Deciding who would keep the coffee mugs from shared mornings. Learning how to exist without the familiar presence of another person in the room. There were moments of doubt. Late at night, Mark sometimes wondered if he had given up too soon, if forgiveness might have eventually healed everything. But those thoughts passed as quickly as they came. In their place was a growing sense of calm. The constant tension he'd lived with since the discovery had begun to fade. Letting go, he learned, wasn't about erasing love or pretending the past didn't matter. It was about accepting that some things, once broken, don't return to their original shape, and that choosing peace over nostalgia is sometimes the bravest act of all. With distance came space to heal. Mark focused on routines that grounded him. Early morning walks, regular workouts, quiet evenings spent reading or thinking without interruption. At first, these habits felt like distractions, but slowly they became anchors. His mind, once crowded with questions and what-ifs, began to clear. He allowed himself to feel everything without judgment. Some days were light, filled with relief and confidence. Others were heavy, shadowed by memories that still carried weight. But the pain no longer controlled him. It arrived, stayed briefly, and passed. That alone felt like progress. Mark also began opening up to a few close friends, sharing his story honestly for the first time. Speaking aloud made it real and survivable. He realized healing wasn't about becoming unaffected by the past, but about learning to carry it without letting it define him. As weeks turned into months, Mark noticed a shift in how he viewed relationships, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He no longer believed that love was something that sustained itself automatically. It required attention, courage, and the willingness to confront discomfort before it turned into distance. He also learned the importance of listening, not just to a partner, but to himself. The unease he had felt early on hadn't been paranoia. It had been intuition. Ignoring it hadn't protected the marriage. It had only delayed the truth. That realization stayed with him, reshaping how he approached honesty and boundaries. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt open to the future, not rushing towards something new, but no longer afraid of it either. The experience had stripped away illusions, leaving behind a quieter, stronger sense of self. Looking back, Mark no longer defined the experience solely by betrayal. It had been a breaking point, yes, but also a moment of awakening. He saw now how easily people can drift apart when comfort replaces communication, and how silence can be just as damaging as conflict. He understood that staying too long in pain doesn't make someone loyal. It makes them lost. Choosing himself hadn't meant rejecting love. It meant refusing to accept a version of it built on doubt. That lesson, hard-earned, became something he carried forward with quiet confidence. Mark didn't regret loving deeply. If anything, the experience taught him that love is not measured by how much you endure, but by how honestly you live within it. In the end, Mark emerged from the experience changed, but not broken. The affair had taken something from him. Innocence, certainty, the simplicity of trust, but had also given him clarity. He learned that relationships demand presence, not assumptions, and that ignoring emotional distance can be just as dangerous as open conflict. If he were to offer advice to others facing a similar situation, it would be this: listen to what hurts, and don't rush to silence it for the sake of comfort. Betrayal is deeply personal, but healing is a choice that belongs only to you. Whether that path leads to rebuilding or letting go, the most important thing is to move forward with honesty, self-respect, and compassion for both yourself and others. And while the ending wasn't the one he had once imagined, it was real. And in that truth, Mark found peace.